Action. Welcome, folks, to this filmmaker event here.
Roll sound. Cameras rolling.
Hi, I'm Dana Roscoe, and welcome to Butter City. Our guest today is Dawn Mickelson. She's the founder of Emergence Pictures. So moving on to Green Green Water, which, why don't you tell us a little bit about, tell us about how you got to that film.
You know, there were a lot of different paths that led to that film. One was an article in City Pages that chronicled the Pimicikamat Cree Nation, one of the strongest nations that is fighting hydro, large-scale dams. And I found it fascinating simply because here I was, somebody who thought I was buying green energy, thought I was doing the right thing, and then hearing these incredible stories about people whose lives were devastated by my clean energy, my green energy, and wanting to know what the truth of that was, or at least wanting to bring those stories to other people's consciousness. Because I think it's important that we know how our lives impact others. And so I ended up meeting with people from Minnesotans for an Energy Efficient Economy, which is now Fresh Energy. And luckily they had inroads to these communities and visited, and then it became quite clear that this film had to be made. When it becomes more than an issue, when you meet people, and it's no longer, oh, those people up there, that must be a hard thing for them, but it's Charlie Osborne, a guy I'd met, a guy who was very wonderful and sweet, and this happened to him.
Yeah.
And now it's personal, that's my friend. So.
And what's interesting about the film is that it's not one giant story, and let me finish on that idea, but it's not like one giant story, you know, it is many, many little stories coming together to make one giant situation. But it's these people with their families and life and livelihood that are so affected, and there's so much totality to the way they're affected. But I want to take a look at a clip, and
Okay.
we'll talk more about it.
Okay.
Nyanan pastigo dattagodan chimpektago that nyanan gittagono pastigo isugo nago lunchego teak ismigio tago teon pastigo awani ga isittene mistigo nante isfim what go about in pastigo dattago di papi apo is ismigio tago tegan in pastigo.
We're the ones receiving the most benefit, so it seems like we have a greater obligation to be involved in the solution.
You know, you hear hydropower and you're like, rock on,
Yeah.
I'm all for it. And you just don't really look in your outlet and see what's all the way at the other end. And it's cool that you took it on, because I think that it's not that we have to be anti-green energy, but it's really good to consider that hardly ever is there just something, a panacea. There rarely is just one answer. I mean, I can go into what I think of using corn oil, but anyway. Let's talk about, I guess, the way it was shot, because you put yourself in this movie.
Yeah.
And you do that from the level of the fact that a consumer should consider where their product comes from. And you're like, I have energy, I use a toaster, and every time I use a toaster, that is a political decision because of the way it affects everyone at the other end. But I mean, as far as shooting it, I mean, that must have been different too, because you weren't behind the camera as much. I think the film looks great.
Thank you.
And I mean, and so did your other work, but what was that like being photographed?
It was a little unnerving. I tried my best to pretend that the camera never went to me. We do some shots that are in a vehicle driving down the road, and it's a different experience to be on the other side of the camera. But I also knew, given the fact that in not only my consumer, but you know, this is a longer conversation, but as a white filmmaker making a film that the primary characters are indigenous, it's important that people know who's telling this story, and because we don't want people to make the assumption that this is being told by an indigenous filmmaker. I think voice is very important when you're dealing with race issues, when you're dealing, because it's been taken advantage of so much. So many white filmmakers have made horrendous films on indigenous, on indigenous cultures, and it needs to be clear that the person telling the story doesn't live in this community. Whereas disobedience, the person telling the story did live in that community.
Sure.
So you could tell it more truthfully without needing to know who is behind the camera, I guess.
You know, there's so much to talk about when it comes to kind of films with kind of an activist point of view to them. You know, I mean, I know that you got, I don't know if you got direct funding, but I know that you got some help from activist groups in the Twin Cities.
Yes.
I know some of that footage was from that. And I was thinking, as I was, you know, getting ready for the show, that like there are filmmakers out there, Michael Moore, Morgan Spurlock, who did Super Size Me. Within the first 2 minutes of the film, you pretty much know where they're going to come down on the topic. Your films, you kind of explore the idea, and we kind of go along with you, and we land somewhere. Certainly, you have a point of view. If someone knows you personally, they probably know where you come down on issues. But what do you think of this new kind of documentary filmmaking that seems to be more activist than documentarian? I mean, it seems to be kind of a debate right now.
It is a debate, and I think there needs, in some ways, there needs to be a liberation of the term documentary, because I think that my opinion on it actually is that they are documentary filmmakers, and that I think so often people see documentary as something that needs to be a journalistic pursuit where you give 50% of your minutes to one side and 50% to another. And I think that that's a valid way to do a documentary as well, but I don't think it has to be that way. I think a documentary can be editorial, and I think it's clear that Spurlock and Michael Moore, they don't pretend to not have an opinion. It is clear that they have an opinion, and
I like
so
their opinions.
yeah. Oh, for the most part, I come down in a similar place. But I think that yeah, that whole piece about, I guess I come from having worked in news, and one of the things that was very solidified for me in that work was how every little decision you make as a storyteller comes from your opinion, from your perspective, no matter how hard you try to be unbiased. But you do have to try.
Yeah. Well, Chuck Palahniuk, the writer, says that every work of art is somewhat of a self-portrait, because you're out there somewhat.
Yeah.
I know that you're working on another documentary called The Red Tail, which I would like to talk about. But first, I want to take another look at a clip from Green Green Water, and we'll talk a little bit more about that after. Okay. Let's see.
I think that one of the problems is that people want to separate the environment from the people, and I don't think that you can do that.
As part of their relocation to the mainland, residents of South Indian Lake were paid $2,000 to burn down their homes. Manitoba Hydro supplied them with hydro houses.
They're all rotting.
What kind of wood is this, do you know?
This is supposed to be this treated wood, eh? So this is my old step. We built a new step a couple of days ago.
Oh, wow.
It's all rotting. So the house is falling apart. The hydro house. So these are new windows. I replaced these windows, eh? Because the windows they got are, when I talked to this guy, they said they call them California slides. Because they belong in California, they don't belong in the north.
You don't have running water in this house?
No. This is how we grew up in the, like, they're supposed to improve everything, eh? This is the 21st century. We still have we don't have running water.
Oh, don't do that.
The older generation, they weren't educated in dealing with people like Manitoba Hydro and all their political talks and their lawyers and all that. So I believe our generation was excluded in a lot of things. So nowadays, my generation, we tend to look at the youth. We talk to the youth a lot. I try to, like, things happen, I try to get their point of view, because they're the ones that are going to be impacted.
Right.
Like, they never thought about us that way. Yeah. Like, we're taking the burden from the most likely from the flood. Eh? In Canada, it's like a third world country in the north here. You know, the way we live. But you know, that's where we manage. Eh? Like I'm considering myself lucky in this community. I have a house, and there's some families here that there's 3 families in one house. Like if it was in the city, they'd be called the homeless, but here in Sound, I think everybody takes care of one another, like we said, eh?
Again, at the time, before the dams were built, I think there was a general sense this will bring in, there'll be so much money that we'll have enough money to do whatever we want to do. And of course, the engineers for Hydro were saying this will have no serious environmental impacts, you know, on the rivers, the water will still be pure, people can still use them. In fact, it's had, of course, major impacts on the quality of water, as anyone who travels on those rivers now can see. So what we were told by the engineers is not actually what happened on the one hand. And then on the second hand, for example, one of the schedules attached to the Northern Flood Agreement promised the eradication of poverty in the communities, Schedule E, actually. You know, these were small communities, they could put money into them, there'd be no problem. Very big promises, in other words, which they realized soon after the dam was built, they couldn't really keep.
Wow, there's such a story there. You really got to see the whole thing. Yeah, it's sad. So if people want to get a copy or view it, clips from it, they can go to what?
For Green Green Water, they should go directly to the film's website, which is greengreenwater.com.